Good evening. It is time for today's Tax Talk. I'm your host. I'm attorney Stephen Leahy. It is Monday, August 8th, the year of our Lord 2022. And it's like what everybody's talking about, right? I've been telling you here, it's going to come. It's coming. The Inflation Reduction Act and all the good things that it brings. That's what we're going to talk about today. Won't you join us? So they got it up over the Democrats got it up over the hill. They resurrect every time they talk about this bill, the Build Back Better plan, the IRS doubling the size of the IRS, double it, 87,000 new IRS employees, going after your bank account, your cash apps, all of that. You can't know about it. It's got to happen very quickly, because if people get wind of it, they start objecting, and the objections, they can't be overcome, and it defeats these bills. And so they have to do it very quickly on the weekend, over and over again. I don't know if you know this, but that bill that just passed, this Inflation Reduction Act, was 755 pages now. It probably will grow because it's going to the House, and they'll put more stuff in there. And it's 755 pages. But so let's find out what that is. I'm going to first. I have an article I'd like to read, and we'll go through that one. I think it's interesting. And there's so many articles out there on this. I listed more than I usually do in the description below, so you can see those. But there's lots of, and we'll probably be talking about this for some time. We do like to refer to this as the Inflation Act. But Attorney Leahy is a reduction. Yeah, it's a reduction, for inflation reduction. I don't know what it's doing to reduce inflation. I just see how it's going to add to inflation. My own opinion. We should probably play the. Let's get into this first, and then we'll talk about that. So here's the story. This is from the American Thinker. They take a different tact on this, kind of the tact that I do, and that's why I want to read it. The talk in the media is about beefed up IRS. The IRS budget for fiscal 2022 totals nearly $14 billion. Actually, in 11.9 inappropriate. Actually, I think it's over $14 billion, but I don't want to quibble with that. With the full-time equivalent staff ceiling of 79,808. Now, the Democratic-controlled Congress, at the behest of the Biden administration, wants to take that up to an additional almost $80 billion, with 1% going to the Department of Treasury offices other than the IRS. That adds up to nearly $93 billion, 7 times this year's budget. 7 times. In addition, Democrats want to add another 86,852 full-time equivalents, more than doubling the staffing to 166,660. These positions are described as new, specialized enforcement staff. See page 17 of the American Families Plan, Tax Compliance Agenda for more. The increased funding and staffing are designed to restore IRS enforcement capability through the sustained rebuilding of the IRS. According to IRS data, staffing was at its peak in 1995 at 114,064 full-time equivalents. That was before automation, common use internet, and e-filing. Data processing took more than a quarter of all staff. They call this processing, not data processing. They called it return processing. I looked up all the budgets. Within 2 years, the data processing staff was cut in half. No surprise there, and disappeared altogether as a category a couple of years later. So they went from one of the biggest slices of the IRS to not even having their own line item in the several years. So they went from 116. Well, I have the numbers. As banking became more automated, collection staff numbers other than revenue officers were reduced by 2/3. With the advent of e-filing, the filing and account management staff declined. Staffing has been more or less at today's levels for a decade, which is eminently reasonable as more sophisticated automation is available to both the IRS and the taxpayer. Under these circumstances, the IRS will not be rebuilding its old structure nor restoring anything that may have been lost. So what's going on? Something doesn't add up. We know through observing Biden administration congressional activities over the past half a year that it takes about $80 billion to cover our costs for a proxy war between the U.S., NATO, and other nuclear power. While practice doesn't always make perfect, it certainly sets a pattern. Now the same actors plan to spend $80 billion going after unpaid income taxes. However, it looks more like Biden and his pet Congress critters are about to fund a war on we the people. And again, I subscribe to this. I agree with this, that it's a war on the people. This is the same group of people who wanted to fund the police, and now they're doubling the funding for the IRS. If that is going to set our priorities, and I think that the way you spend your money sets your priorities, that speaks volume in my mind. Too much, you say. Well, we've been bombarded from all sides with the reduction in domestic fuel supplies and a corresponding doubling in price at the pump, instability in stock, commodities, housing, and precious metals markets, record inflation rates across all sectors, and stuttering food shortages. They tell us will only get worse, all courtesy of Biden and the Dems, softening us up for a bigger blow, maybe? On April 29, 2021, Biden announced as part of his jobs and family plan that the IRS was going to crack down on millionaires and billionaires who cheat on their taxes. Billions of dollars, he promised, would be recovered. Within a few days, Treasury estimated that as of 2019, $600 billion in back taxes were owed. It opined that for every dollar spent on enforcement, $4 could be recovered. The Biden administration treats this as a straight line proposition. But the pool of tax cheats is not large, and the recoverable funds are not infinite. Over time, as enforcement is increasingly effective, less and less funding will be recovered. Biden's Build Back Better framework, issued in October 2021, noted that the wage earners had 99% tax compliance rate and that the miscreant 1% evades about $116 billion per year in taxes. Sounds like a lot, but it's not too bad, actually. That's just 4% of the $3.863 trillion taken in. Given that perfection will always elude us, at what point does this become statistically insignificant and unjustifiably wasteful? There are about 12,000 agents in the IRS and about 145 million taxpayers. Do we really need 87,000 more agents to address issues with maybe 1.5 million taxpayers? Absolutely not. So again, that's this money. What's this money for? In the original BBB bill, this section took up a page. Now it's 10 pages long. It starts on page 1926 of the current version of H.R. 5376 and on page 31 of the Senate's draft Inflation Reduction Act. Versions are slightly different, but the total is the same. In the $45 billion enforcement section, we've got to provide digital asset monitoring. If that doesn't make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, I don't know what will. The IRS should be concerned only with assets it suspects are being funded through tax fraud, and it doesn't take $45 billion to do that. But to establish the ability to implement Senator Warren's unconstitutional wealth tax, well, it might be just enough. $403 million in Inspector General to keep the IRS on the straight and narrow. Maybe hire some ethical folks, get rid of those that misbehave, and save that money. And about those 87,000 new folks, the IRS already can't meet its annual hiring goals. If you worked there, would you let folks know? A friend of mine even kept her family in the dark. IRS agents aren't accountants. No, are accountants. Now that the San Diego school district is giving straight A's to every child who lives in the district, whether or not they show up for school. Think of any of them will be able to make it through 30 semester hours of increasingly complex accounting courses? 40% of all accounting graduates opt to become CPAs, which takes them out of the running for entry-level agent positions. CPAs need a full year's worth of credits on top of their degree, a couple years of public accounting sweatshop, passing all the segments of the CPA exam, and annually continuing education credits. Starting wages for agents are significantly lower than for private industry accountants. Buried in the wording in a paragraph giving the Secretary of the Treasury the ability to hire directly into the competitive service without regard for current laws that mandate publicly announcing available competitive service openings, the Secretary can ignore all federal laws that give hiring preference to veterans, the disabled, former employees, that would include those fired for not taking the COVAX, military spouses, Peace Corps volunteers. That's one way to make sure that only those who meet a political smell test get to participate in this new IRS enforcement program. This is unsupportable. It's unnecessary, wasteful, and is covering up the true plans of Pelosi, Schumer, Warren, Sanders, and the rest of the ultra-progressives cohorts. Stop it now. Stop this war on we the people. Senators Manchin and Sinema, I'm surprised and very disappointed that you could agree to such a huge hit on your constituents. The cost of letting this go through will be far greater than any cost associated with voting nay. Well, it's too late for that. They all voted for it. So that's just the way it is. It's passed. It hasn't passed the House yet, but it will. This misnamed Inflation Reduction Act, a pointless giveaway to special interests. There has been some talk among the legacy media about how recent legislative victories, the semiconductor giveaway and the pending reconciliation, might give President Biden and congressional Democrats new momentum and help them hold on to their majority, at least in the Senate. Unfortunately, voters don't care about legislative victories, nor should they. Legislative victories are only important to voters if they lead to improvements in their lives, if they make the economy better or the nation or their neighborhood safer. So far, the victories to date have consisted of taking money from taxpayers, either current or future, and spending it on a bunch of things that matter to folks in Washington. The most recent example is, of course, the newly revived reconciliation legislation. That legislation, misnamed the Inflation Reduction Act, is going to be much like the semiconductor legislation and the infrastructure legislation before that, or the American Rescue Plan before that. An outsized and pointless giveaway to special interests that would do nothing to improve the lot of Americans, or in the worst case, actively damage Americans. The current legislation would, according to the Tax Foundation, increase taxes on those in every income quintile and consequently reduce economic growth. Should we read more? It also would increase federal spending for more than 400 by more than $400 billion over 10 years, which is, of course, the entire purpose of the exercise. Here's what it would not do: reduce inflation. Our friends at the University of Pennsylvania have done some analysis that indicates that the legislation would have no measurable effect on inflation. Even Mark Zandi, the in-house apologist for Democrats at Moody's Analytics, admitted that at best, the legislation might reduce inflation 9 years from now by 1/3 of 1%. How about direct reduction? While squeezing more out of the taxpayers by spending $80 billion on the IRS and agencies whose current annual budget is $12.7 billion, again, actually $14 billion with the additions, might be good fun. It doesn't score as a revenue raiser. It turns out that the Congressional Budget Office assumes that the federal agency is already enforcing the law. So right away, the amount of revenue available for deficit reduction is less than anticipated. One thing that does count as a revenue raiser is letting the federal government impose price controls on prescription drugs through Medicare. That money would be used to subsidize health insurance for rich people. If that sounds unfair and inequitable, it's because it is. If federal control of prescription drugs scares you, it should. Researchers at the University of Chicago have concluded that such an approach would wind up killing people because less research would lead to fewer life-saving drugs. Finally, there has been a lot of talk about the cash directed at climate change. At $370 billion, it is most of the spending. The only problem is that we've been down this road before, and it leads nowhere. Since 2005, the federal government has spent about $850 billion on alternative energy. Here are the results. In 2005, the United States relied on coal, oil, and natural gas to produce 80% of its primary energy. Last year, after all that money was spent, the United States relied on coal, oil, and natural gas to produce about 80% of its primary energy. An analysis from the Roddick Group indicates that the legislation may not have no effect at all on greenhouse emissions, or it may reduce emissions by as much as 500 million tons a year, close to 10% of what we emit now. If the legislation results in 500 million fewer tons of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, we would have paid about $7,000 per ton of the reduction. If that seems like a lot, it's because it is a lot. The best estimates we have on any possible damage from global warming indicate that the cost of carbon might be as high as $150 a ton. In other words, even if the legislation does what its supporters say it will do, we would be wildly overspending for what we would be getting. But there is little reason to think that we will get anywhere near those reductions, because we can't turn wind and solar power on and off at will. They will always require a firm supply of backup generation. Right now, that backup is natural gas. While the legislation is a grab bag of giveaways to wind, solar, electric vehicles, etc., it does nothing specifically to reduce emissions from either electric generation or cars and trucks. In short, the legislation does nothing for inflation, increases spending, increases taxes for pretty much everyone, reduces economic growth, and despite the propaganda, is probably not going to change the trajectory of our energy use. So there you have it. I wanted to go through those two. There's many more of these articles, and I can go on and on and on and on about criticizing it. I should probably read one that does not criticize it, thinks it's a great thing. But that's all you have to do is watch the news. You'll hear that, what a great thing it is, how it's going to save the world. It's going to save lives. It's going to save the world. It's doing nothing of those things. It's just another spending spree by the federal government. And that's what they're best at. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the articles I chose here today. Thanks so much for joining us. Remember to like and subscribe. We want you to like and subscribe. Help us get this information out. We need your help to do that. So like and subscribe to our content. And remember, if you are fighting the IRS before they get the 87,000 new people, or if you haven't filed your tax returns, what's the first thing you should do? Get a copy of my book, Deal with Your IRS Problem Today. Go to freeirsbook.com, freeirsbook.com. That's freeirsbook.com. Get your free copy of Deal with Your IRS Problem Today. We will ask for a small shipping fee, cover our shipping costs, but the book is free, and all of the other bonuses are also free. There's some special reports and other things in the box. So go to freeirsbook.com, get your free copy. So thanks so much for joining us here today. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Tomorrow is Crypto Tuesday. There is some crypto news, so I hope you can join us. Thank you again, and we'll see you tomorrow.